So let's look at the concept here that humor is nothing more than cognitive dissonance, where it's something that you're uncomfortable with or that there's some sort of contradiction. So, like, most of it is going to be something that you're forced to endure by indoctrination and society that goes against your inherent internal nature that you have to pretend you don't really want to do. So, for example, let's look at sexual elements, right? People inherently might just want to be free and uninhibited, but in society, oh, you have to be with only one person. So we have to convince ourselves and pretend like that's absolute and that's what we want. But then a lot of humor has to do with it. We'll make fun of that. We'll pick on relationships and things like that, and so we laugh it off. But there's almost like a darker interpretation to that is you're kind of laughing or being made fun of to your face of like how much that is cognitive dissonance inducing and how much it goes against your nature. Like the laughter and the reason why it's funny is because of that in part or maybe entirely because again it's the discomfort of realizing, oh, you're doing this thing that isn't absolute, right? Like being with the one person because society tells you to and controls you and it's easier to control that way. You're doing it, right? And you're treating it as though it's absolute, but then somebody points out how it's not absolute, right? Like a comedian or whatever, and then, oh, you kind of laugh it off because you can't explain it away, right? So you'd say, oh, it's absolute, but then you're faced with the fact that it's not. And so you sort of laugh almost as a defense mechanism, or that's all you can do because you can't actually face it or rebut it. That's often what humor is. And so that's sort of a little darker interpretation that it's you kind of facing the cognitive dissonance of society or some state that you're forced to be in or pressured to be in that isn't natural or isn't something you would actually choose or want. So you pretend like you want it or you pretend it's absolute. But then again, if it's exposed that it's not, then we kind of just laugh at it. So it's kind of like treating that as the norm and the absolute, like, oh, that's going to be the way things are. That just is what it is, no matter what. Right? There's nothing that could convince you or change your mind because you're so heavily indoctrinated, and that's how society is going to operate. So all we can do is laugh at it and poke fun at it. We can never actually change it or be free of it, right? Regardless of, oh, some internal nature that we have, some other desire we have, some other choice we have, some free will. So it's sort of like revealing the truth despite our pretenses. Like, oh no, we want to be nice and civilized and live in exactly the way society tells us to. And then we reveal or expose something like, oh no, maybe you just want to be a slob and just hedonistic and just do whatever you want and be free in nature. We laugh at that like, oh, look, that's ridiculous. Or, oh, especially things to do with sex are often used as humor because, again, that's such a fixation of humanity that we're sort of obsessed with that. Or it's, again, this hedonistic fixation. So what it means is, again, maybe people just want to do that. They want to just be hedonists and not have any restriction. They can just be with whoever they want, whenever they want, right? But because that's being restrained and it causes cognitive dissonance, instead people pretend there's an absolute of restricting that, again, to one person, etc. And then they laugh at the fact of it being revealed that, oh, that's not really what you want, or all the struggle to do with it, or all the artificial elements that are being revealed. And so it's either that or it can be a preconceived expectation is the other purpose of humor, that you expect one thing and then something else happens, like, oh, look, this person's trying to walk and then he trips, right? So that can be a form of humor too, but the bigger one is, again, cognitive dissonance with something that you're forced to endure, pressure to endure, to pretend is absolute, right? That isn't absolute. So you can reveal that, you can observe it, but you can't face it because then you wouldn't do it anymore. It would invalidate the process. You would choose to do something else. So again, it's you or anybody in society, you're pretending something is true and absolute, but you're faced with constantly the fact that it's not. So you laugh it off because you have no other explanation or response to it. So it's a form of discomfort, right? You're with your wife at a comedy show, and then the comedian talks about how marriage, something stupid about marriage, like, oh, we hate marriage, or it's stressful, or my wife's always bitching at me, and all the troubles of married life. And you realize that's part of the conflict of pretending something is absolute that isn't absolute, but yet you do it anyway. So all you can do is laugh it off. You can't actually realize, oh, that just reflects that it's not absolute, and I'm being pressured to do it by society. And so I pretend to want it, or it's absolute, and kind of play into the ego that, oh, it's like meant to be, or make it out to be some false absolute. So again, it could be somebody revealing a truth to you that you can observe, right? The observable nature of a process despite your practice of it, despite you still pretending it's absolute, or despite you still doing it, right? So they could pose that, but you'll still, again, it's like a default, right? Like you're forced to do it. You have to do it, or society pressures you heavily to do it. So you're doing it no matter what. So if somebody points out flaws with it, well, you're doing it anyway, and you can't possibly be wrong. So all you can do is laugh it off that, well, technically what they're saying or observing is correct. It's technically true, but yet you're forced to do it anyway. So what can you do besides laugh? You could stop doing it, but that you're not allowed to do that in society, or you could do something else, but you're pressured not to do that. So what can you do besides laugh?